Resthalrat besia pisen kusrelig. Commercia I press et roi Louis school. Welcome to Indian time again. I would like to say that those of you that went to the 25th annual Flathead Reservation War Dance Championship at the Community Center this past weekend, the 27th and 28th, were treated to quite a show with all the dancers. I understand there was more than 100 dancers at the powwow, and there was at least, I think it was 11 drums that they had there. But the highlights of the War Dance Championships was the fact that they recognized and honored Louise Combs, who has turned 100 years old on the 24th of October. She was recognized and honored by the tribes. She was presented with a Pendleton blanket by the chairman of the Tribal Council, Fred Matt. And I understand Louise, I know, that loves to watch war dancing. She loves war dancing, and her favorite and pastime. And so anyway, during the presentation, the Yaman Sut drum group did a prairie chicken song, sang the prairie chicken song for all the traditional men dancers, which is Louise's favorite, the prairie chicken. She really understands. She really enjoyed a lot of these. Also new at this year's 25th annual championships was they had a Little Miss and a Miss October celebration. Little Miss was Mariah Friedlander, and the Miss October celebration was Anitra Whitford. They were both crowned. This is the first time that anybody's been Miss or Little Miss or Miss October, so that's something new here. Also, there was a lot of visiting and a lot of people usually from all over the area come in to watch this. A couple of reminders for the people out there that tomorrow, the 1st of November, the first Wednesday of the month, will be our monthly cultural elders meeting down at the Longhouse. It's from 9 to 3 o'clock. And the following Wednesday, which will be the 8th, we'll have our cultural orientation, our cultural workshop, which is open to everyone that is interested. And that is usually from 9:30 to 3:30. Today, as you remember last show, I talked about hunting and the different things that happened and things that we do this time of the year. I brought our consultant Tom Smith back today. He does all the researching and the programming, or working on the place name project. But before we get into that, I would like to remind people the words or place names for this show. The two place names that I have is Numlaselk, which is Crow Creek. It was a very important area to a lot of the people who lived in that area. They did a lot of trapping, fishing on the Crow Creek. People lived along the creek. And the other one is Otzkeetk, which is now known today as Spring Creek, which is just northwest or northeast out of Ronan, just a half mile or so. And it's Otzkeetk, and a lot of people depend on that water today. Okay, with that, I think today we're going to, I asked Tom again to come back, and because he has done so much research for the place name project on this subject, I asked him to come back. He's done interviews, he's talked to people, he's collected information from different libraries and archives. So, but first I would like to say, Tom, that before we get into the story in more detail, can you give us a summary of the Swan Massacre? What is known as the Swan Massacre?
Sure, Tony. Thanks for asking me again. And the Swan Massacre happened about 92 years ago in 1908, and it's one of the sadder events in tribal history. And it was an event where Montana State Game Warden killed 4 members of a Pend d'Oreille hunting party over there in the Swan, and in return he was killed by one of the members of the hunting party. And I just wanted to say that one of our elders today, John Peter Paul, is the last survivor of this incident. He was in his mother's womb at the time. She was 6 months pregnant with him. And I just wanted to thank John and give appreciation to him, because in recent years he's decided that this story should be told, that it's something important for the children to learn, an important incident in tribal history. And it's a very tender story even today. It's something I realize has to be treated with a lot of sensitivity and respect. So I just appreciate John's help in helping us learn about this and what happened there and what it means.
Okay, we've been working on this for some time now. How have we been putting this together, the story together?
Well, it's part of the Tribal History Project, and like the rest of the project, our first goal, I guess, is to gather all the accounts of this from the elders themselves. Throughout this project, we've regarded the elders as the primary authorities on this and other aspects of tribal history. So we've gathered all those together. We've also gathered every document we can find from the National Archives, the University of Montana Archives, other archives of Montana Historical Society, and trying to piece those together along with the photographic record. So we've worked that way, and as we create drafts of each incident in the tribal history, including the story of the Swan Massacre of 1908, we then run it back by the elders. In this case, first of all, John Peter Paul, and then the other elders will be submitting our write-up on this stuff and for their review, so they're comfortable with it and it's the story they want told about it.
Was this an isolated incident, or was it part of some bigger trend in the history of that time?
Well, I guess it was both. It was an isolated incident in that it was an unusually violent event in the history of relations between the tribes and non-Indians in Montana. But it was also part of a historical trend at the time. There are unfortunate reasons why this happened. In general, in a wider sense in Montana at that time, there was a transition from tribalism to a market economy, from the traditional way of life being the way that shaped the land in Montana, that ordered the human relation with the environment, to one that was very different. And the commodification of resources was happening. Just that year in 1908, there was logging on a scale that had never been seen before in the Sealy-Swan area. And throughout this time, tribal people had been persisting in trying to maintain their traditional ways of hunting off the reservation. But by the turn of the century, by 1900, the state of Montana was extending control over these last remaining remote pockets of Montana. And part of it was extending a police presence over the woods in the form of game wardens and instituting new rules over the hunting of game. And there are, of course, some good reasons for that too. There have been a lot of over-harvesting of game in Montana, but also part of it was control. And as we'll see, some of these wardens were pretty zealous about control over these things, and to them, part of that was getting rid of this very different way of life, the tribal way of life that people were still practicing. So, in that sense, this was part of that transition, and part of a larger historical trend.
Okay. How were tribes responding to these pressures?
I guess most of all by persistence. They, in spite of the violence, and there was not only violence from wardens, but there was also violence against tribal members by many non-Indian citizens in Montana. There are many records that we found, and from the elders' accounts of other incidents where people were harassed or killed for hunting off the reservation, for fishing off the reservation, for just traveling off the reservation. And in spite of that, people continued to do that. And part of it was because they still depended on these things. Many tribal members still relied on these traditional foods, on hunting, fishing, the traditional plants that were gathered for foods and medicines for their subsistence and their survival. So part of it was that. But part of it also was that people were very conscious that part of what the treaty guaranteed in 1855, the Hellgate Treaty, was the right of people to continue to hunt and to live by the traditional ways on what were called open and unclaimed lands off the reservation. So people were consciously resisting the attempt by the state to strip them of those treaty rights.
Okay, well, that sounds very ancient. Tom, did tribal people have different relationships with various wardens? I know there's been a lot of wardens. We have a lot of stories on different. Were the relationships different from what happened here?
Yeah, that's what the elders tell us, is that there were some wardens that people had very good relations with. And as we'll see in the story of the Swan Massacre, that was even true in the Swan in 1908. There were some wardens who sympathized with the tribes, who understood the history, who understood the tribe's very ancient relationship with these places and how people took care of things, how they never hunted more than they needed, how they used whatever was hunted, and respected the treaties. There were other wardens who just wanted absolute control and who were very zealous about really bringing down the arm of the law on people they saw as violating the law. Because, of course, when you're hunting to feed the people, it's different from sport hunting. You're not just hunting 1 or 2 deer. You're hunting enough for people to have their winter meat. And some of these wardens, including the warden who's the main warden in this incident, a man named Charles Peyton, were of that nature. We have a lot of accounts of Peyton, of what happened even before the Swan Massacre. John Peter Paul has told us how the year before, in 1907, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but a man named Tulquiste, Old Man Abel, I guess in English, he and his wife and a small party were hunting in the Swan, and Peyton really came down hard on them. And I guess Tulquiste's wife chased Peyton off with a hatchet, and he used the barrel of his rifle to fend off a blow from the hatchet, but they chased him off. And so John told us that after that he really had an even stronger grudge against the people, the Indian people from here, and he wanted to enforce the law against them. And he was known as one of these real kind of hard cases. Somebody who really wanted to enforce the law hard and didn't have much flexibility about it.
Okay, let's take a short break here, Tom, and we'll come back with, I have more questions here, so we'll take a short break here.
Shut up!
Please, don't get like that. Please, just don't get
Don't get like what? No, come here! Don't get like what?
I didn't mean it. It's just to get so angry.
That's enough from you! Enough! 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 That's enough! I'm gonna give you something to scream about! Get over here! Get up!
I can't.
I'm talking to you! Get up!
I can't get it off. Don't do this.
Stop crying! You're asking for it again!
For information about how you can help stop domestic violence, call us.
Welcome back. I'm here visiting with Tom from our consultant down at the Salish Culture Committee. Tom, before I ask you the next question, we talk about the resources and information that we've gathered over the years and who we've talked to. Who are some of the people that have contributed towards this part of the story?
Well, most of all, I should mention John Peter Paul. As I say, he's the last surviving elder from this incident, and it was his father who was killed there, and he was in his mother's womb at the time. So John has very generously told us what he knows about it, what his mother told him, and what the other elders. His dad's aunt, Sap Shin Ma, who was Mrs. Yellow Mountain, helped raise him too. He stayed with her when John was attending the boarding schools in St. Ignatius. He was a day scholar and he would stay with her, so she also told him, and the other people who were there told him. So John, I should mention first of all, and also his mother, Clarice Paul. There were a couple times when she told her story about it. Most of all, there's one from 1955, and that's probably our most complete telling of what happened there. There's also an affidavit that Clarice Paul and Mary Tsui, I guess Tapat, the one they called Tapat, that they gave right after the incident in 1908. That one is good too, but of course they were also making their comments in, they didn't have complete safety and trust when they were telling it because they were worried about even getting prosecuted for the death of the warden. Years later, in the 60s, little Mary Finley, who was Tapat's daughter and was 6 years old at the time, she told her story and to Louis Tellier, and that was published, and we have copies of that. Mitch Smallsalmon, on many of the Culture Committee tapes, oral histories at the Culture Committee, he told it, as did other elders on the tapes more briefly, like Pete Woodcock, Pete Beaverhead, Agnes Vanderberg. Some of the elders told aspects of it, but probably Mitch a bit more than the other ones on the tapes. Mary Smallsalmon told a fair bit about this incident to Chauncey Beaverhead about 6 years ago, and he recorded it for the Culture Committee. And the other one I should mention is Joe Eneas. When Roy Bigcrane and I were interviewing Joe for The Place of the Falling Waters, he told aspects of things about this history too.
This was quite a tragedy, so I imagine that after this happened, I imagine a lot of people throughout the tribal people here just was discussing and talking about what happened there. Did anyone have a feeling or a sense that something bad was going to happen?
Well, there might have been quite a bit, but the one story we have about that was told to us by Joe Eneas on one of the interviews Roy and I did with him, and he told about how he and his father, his mother, and I think his aunt were traveling over. They traveled over to the Swan the summer before this happened, so this would be in the summer of 1908. The incident happened in October of 1908, so this was in the summer, a few months before. They traveled over to gather huckleberries, and as you can imagine, horseback, that's a long trip over, and they went all the way over into the Swan. And Joe told us that his father one night, I don't know if it was a dream or just something, some feeling came to him, but it was such a strong feeling that something bad was going to happen, that Joe said before they even got any huckleberries, they packed up the camp and came back over the mountains, not even by the regular trail, but taking the ridge tops, the rough trails, or not even the trails, off the trail and the ridge tops, and came all the way back. And it was that strong a feeling. So Joe said his dad had a sense something bad was going to happen. And another thing like that happened too is after the killings took place, but before news of it had come anywhere, Agnes Vanderburg said her folks were camped across the mountains where they couldn't have heard about it, and an owl came and told them about what had happened, so they knew before they even got back to the reservation.
Who was in this hunting party, and how did it get started? How did it start out? Well,
the leader of it was a man named Atwen Tsui, and we have one picture of him. He's on the second from the left of one of those long pictures of a group of dancers and drummers and singers before one of the powwows in the early 20th century. That's the only picture I know of him. And he was the one who kind of was trying to gather a party to go hunting. And the way the elders told it was that he first asked Isidore Woodcock, and he couldn't go. I think he lacked a license, or there was some reason he couldn't go. No, he was planning to go over to the Thompson River. But his son, Joe Woodcock, he also asked, and Joe didn't have a license and didn't have enough money to get one or get ammo or things like that. So they couldn't go. They probably would have otherwise. He then went and asked Camille Paul, who'd be John Peter Paul's father, and Camille right away said sure, he'd like to go. And so Camille Paul and John's mother, Kadoli Clarice Paul, who, as I say, was pregnant with John, about 6 months pregnant, said they'd go. And then he went and he asked an old man named Yellow Mountain. I don't know how was that said?
Kwaliuhutu.
Yeah. And he right away said he'd like to go. And they just asked him and his wife, Sapshin Ma, who was also very elderly, to come and just take care of the camp, to haul wood, haul water, take care of the horses. And Yellow Mountain, they didn't think he needed a hunting permit, but he said that he didn't feel right. So they said, well, go to the agent and talk to him, and he'll fix everything up for you. So the way the elders have told it, Yellow Mountain went to the agent, and the agent wrote a permission for him, just said he has permission to go off the reservation. And incredible as it may seem now, in those days, for traditional people to go off the reservation, they felt they had to have permission from the agent just to go off the reservation. And so Yellow Mountain did that. He got that permission with the understanding he wouldn't really be doing much hunting. The elders tell that he was nearly blind and couldn't see very far, couldn't hunt deer very much. So he got a permission. And I should back up a second, because Atwen Tsui was also taking his wife, Tapat, their 6-year-old daughter, who grew up to be Little Mary Finley, and their 14-year-old son, a boy named Palasi, who Frank in English, who had gone to the mission school for about a year. And he was a good friend of Blind Mose Choutez, and also Joannius knew him. Joannius was about 2 years younger than Frank Tsui was. So that was the party, a total of 8 people, 2 elders, Camille Paul and his wife, and Atwen Tsui, his wife, and their 2 children. So they went, and the other thing about them getting hunting permits, that may also sound strange, but to a lot of folks today, since it's well known now that the treaty guarantees hunting rights throughout the Aboriginal territory. And although the people then knew that and felt strongly about it, they, the tribes didn't have a very big tribal government then. They didn't have their own lawyers, so they felt they better get hunting permits. And so they did go and buy hunting permits. We even have letters from the licensed Indian traders, the Beckwiths and so on, recording the numbers of the hunting permits that were sold to Twen Tsui, to Camille Paul, and to Frank Tsui, the Twen's 14-year-old son. So there are 3 hunting permits that were purchased. And with that, I guess I'll just stop there.
Yeah, we're running out of time here. This is it's a very important part of our history. And I think what we'll do here is I'll let the people know that this is going to be in 2 parts, because we aren't going to have time to finish. So we'll finish this on the second part. So we'll close this part of the show off, and then we'll finish it on the next show. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us. Hope you're here again at the next show.